honor of Bob to come forward. Come right here to begin. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Douglas Steinberg, and my father was Robert Morris Steinberg. My family likes to tell stories, and I wanted to share a few that I think paint a portrait of my father. Believe it or not, at one point in my father's life, he was a young boy. I know this is shocking. My father grew up in a streetcar suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, called Cleveland Heights, with his older sister Carol Steinberg Haas, and his parents Ruth Cohn Steinberg and Maury Steinberg. Cleveland Heights had a large Jewish community, and my father had a real joy growing up with a large extended family that lived nearby. One of the major themes of my father's life is his relationship with his sister, our beloved Aunt Carol. It's interesting that your siblings tend to have the largest impact on your life, certainly in terms of duration. Parents pass away when you become adults. You meet your spouse or your life partner later in life. Your children, for the most part, come after that. But siblings tend to be within a few years of your birth and share the longest percentage of your life. Yes, David, we're stuck together still. Anyone who knew my father knew that he loved his sister Carol. But that might not have been as clear as you think it was when they were growing up together. My father and Carol used to have an infamous squabble over who would get to read the Sunday funnies first. The battle tore on for some time with no clear victor. But Carol decided one Sunday that her time had come, and apparently she swooped down like a hawk, grabbed the Sunday funnies, and locked herself in the bathroom and began to read them. My father was enraged and banged so hard on the door he jammed it shut. My grandparents were unable to open the door, and the firemen had to be called. A shamefaced Carol Steinberg had to be rescued in her jammies by the fire department, with a wider audience of neighbors and friends who'd run out into the yard to see what the commotion was. My grandfather, ever the diplomat, somehow secured from the Cleveland Plain dealer 2 separate funny papers in the future so the kids could both read. A little later, the real relationship between Carol and Robert came out in another legendary battle. My father was in elementary school, I'm not sure how old he was, and was the victim of a classic schoolyard bully by the name of Danny Firestone. Danny had just pushed my father into a bunch of prickler bushes when Carol, God bless her, came running to my father's defense. "You can't push my brother into those prickler bushes," cried an indignant Carol. Danny's response was to push her into the bushes as well. One may wonder, is there any justice in this world? How can I tell a story without some sort of a catch? Well, revenge did come later. In high school, a now teenage Danny Firestone asked a very beautiful Carol Steinberg to the homecoming, only to be flatly rejected with a strident explanation as to why. Tough luck to you, Mr. Firestone, wherever you are. As part of a Jewish family growing up in the 30s and the 40s, one of my father's heroes was FDR, the man who, in our family viewpoint, rescued this country from the Great Depression and triumphed over the evils of Adolf Hitler. You could say that my father was a believer in the potentially positive role of government, whether it was the New Deal, JFK's famous call, ask not what you can do for your country, or ask not what your country could do for you, ask what you can do for your country, or LBJ's Great Society reforms. It's the height of irony that my father died the same day as a horrendous tyrant of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, a man who used government to rob and torture his people. Perhaps there's some sort of karma, and that a man despised by all leaves us at the same time as a man who dedicated his life to fight such ignorance. When my father was in the 6th grade, as part of a school project, he wrote a speech about the need for the United Nations. The speech was so good that my father's Uncle Eli insisted that he read the speech the next day so it could be recorded. I've heard the tape. It's a very good speech, and it's clearly what my dad believed in at a very early age. I'll skip my dad's awkward teenage years and talk only briefly about college. Dad had a mathematics background and graduated at Oberlin College and then MIT with a master's of economics. But truth be told, much to perhaps to Ruth Steinberg's chagrin, my father's true major was playing poker. My father and his cohorts felt they had figured out the odds, and in an infamous trip to Las Vegas, they were going to break the bank by using a can't-fail system. You can guess the outcome. My dad and his buddies were quickly wiped out by a city dedicated to crushing budding math majors. A now broke Robert Steinberg had to call his mother for help getting home. To her credit, Ruth said, you got yourself to Las Vegas all by yourself. Now you can get home yourself. My father, my straight-laced father, was a beatnik. Yes, shocking. My father spent a fair amount of the portion of the 50s as a beatnik. This led to my father dropping out of a school a couple of times while a draft was in full force and effect. My father exhibiting the bullheadedness that runs endemic in the males of the Steinberg line, ignored the advice of his father, his mother, his academic advisor, and even the secretary of the academic department, and dropped out of college. My father was quickly drafted, and my nearsighted, bookish father was thrown into the infantry. Rarely has a rounded peg hit a more obstinate square hole. My father was sent to Korea. My favorite story was that when Dad was shown his accommodations on his rusty Liberty ship that was going to take him across the vast Pacific, it was a hammock next to hundreds of other hammocks in an overcrowded freighter hold. My dad literally thought they were joking, and he'd be showing something better. Sorry, Dad. He rode out 2 separate typhoons on the way to Korea. At least Dad got to fly back when his hitch was done. Dad returned to his beatnik ways after the military. Picture on the road with Jack Kerouac? Not so far off. Dad was in California, San Francisco to be exact, and low on funds. He once confessed to me that at his nadir, he considered running out on a check by dining and dashing. To his credit, he didn't, so I can skip the story about my dad, the felon. My father got a job working on a National Forest Survey team hiking through some of the beautiful wildernesses in the world in the San Gabriel Mountains of California. My father was always interested in different cultures and beliefs and spent several months working in a Quaker mission in Mexico. Dad tells the story of being chased by a pack of dogs in Mexico and only escaping by leaping in the back of a truck as it drove away. Dad eventually moved through Oberlin, MIT, and on to Washington, D.C. He met and married my mother and had two sons. He had a successful career with the Federal Reserve and the World Bank. Mom and Dad bought a house on 6203 Stratford Road, 301-654-4922. Just never forget that. Dave and I got to grow up on the mean streets of Chevy Chase, Maryland. It was rough. Some of you only knew my dad later in life, struggling against Parkinson's disease that racked and contorted his body. The father I remember as a child growing up in the truly awesome decade of the 70s was a man who lived an active lifestyle and loved his tennis. Picture a wooden racket, white shorts, white sweater, and a Bjorn Borg sweatband around his forehead. Dad used to play pickup tennis games after work, maybe during work, at nearby Norwood Park in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Over the summer in Cape May, New Jersey, my father loved to play on the public clay courts and usually played in the end of the summer tennis tournament. Dad and Carol's husband, Uncle Wally, had a long and usually friendly tennis rivalry that now lives on for the ages. Dad loved to take his family hiking around our cabin on Blue Mountain near Front Royal, Virginia. Dad loved to swim in the ocean, far out and sometimes in heavy surf. making for occasionally some perilous moments. Skipping ahead to later in life when my father was unable to swim anymore, Sandy would take Dad right up to the edge of the ocean and sit on beach chairs so they could feel the waves run through their legs. Dad enjoyed it so much. One day a little boy walked up to Dad and Sandy on the beach and offered his bucket so Sandy could dump water on Dad. I think she did. My memories of Dad growing up include watching TV on a black and white television. There was a time before color. Watching our favorite shows, The $6 Million Man, starring Lee Majors, Wild Kingdom, brought to you by Mutual of Omaha, and The Wide World of Sports, spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of sport. Dad and David rooted as hard as you can for the usually hapless Redskins of the 70s. So I guess things just don't change. David would always pick for his birthday to see the Bullets, back when they were the Bullets at the Cap Center. And every year, like clockwork, the Bullets were wiped out on that particular game. To break the streak of losing, Dad finally suggested we go see the Caps. Also, we had a poker night at the house where David and Doug learned about laughing, that laughing, winking, and the ilk were not good moves when you're trying to bluff. These are little memories, but they're truly fond memories. One cute story about my dad as a father was when David was in the 4th grade, or near that time, and playing a soccer league on a crisp autumn day like today. My mother and I were already watching the game, and for some reason my dad drove separately and came a little later. He then realized there were about 5 different soccer games going on, and he had no idea which one David was playing on. Don't worry, he told himself, I'll just look for the shaggy blonde-haired kid wearing a Redskins jacket. That description fit more than half of the players on the various fields. Apparently, Dad spent almost an hour walking up and down the fields until he found the right place. Dad remarried with Sandy and moved up to Walkersville. Dad's relationship with Sandy has been the cornerstone of the second part of his life. A second marriage for both, but a first-time romance. There he had the pleasure of meeting many of you. My father's health declined. I don't have much to say about it, and Dad would want me to keep this positive. But the poet Ralph Waldo Emerson said, when it is dark enough, you can see the stars. My dad was such a star. How Dad handled his illness truly demonstrates the character of the man, a man both of strength and dignity. There's a Jewish funeral prayer, and I will spare you the mangled Hebrew version. God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant perfect rest on the wings of your divine presence. In the lofty heights of the holy and the pure, who shines as the brightnesses of the heavens, to the soul of Robert Morris Steinberg, who has gone to his eternal rest, as all his family and friends pray for the elevation of his soul. His resting place shall be in the Garden of Eden. Therefore, the Master of Mercy will care for him, and under the protection of his wings for all time, and bind his soul in bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance, and he will rest in peace. Let us all say amen. 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 I thank you on behalf of my father and on behalf of my family for coming here today and celebrating the life of my dad.